So good evening, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started, and I'll say a few things that'll give people a chance to join in, and they won't miss any of the important part that Al will provide. So I think you're all repeat participants from last week, so we don't need a lot of introduction, but as you may recall, I'm Doug Shipman, Director of Windsor Historical Society. With me tonight is Sue Tate Porcaro, our office manager, who's controlling everything for us tonight. I'd like to welcome you back to Chapter 2 of our virtual program entitled Titles, Trees, and Towns, Windsor and its Western Lands with Al Boehm. Thank you all for joining us. Last week, as you may recall, Al took us on a wild ride through the many land grants and charters, the exciting Charter Oak incident, and left us off with the glorious revolution of 1688, which resulted in the installation of King William and Queen Mary, and the reinstatement of Connecticut's original charter. So we can't wait to see what he has in store for us tonight. Just a quick note. First of all, those of you that were with us last week, thank you for responding to our post-program survey. We got some great feedback from everybody. There will be another survey after this program. And you'll be pleased to know that part 1 is up on our Windsor Historical Society YouTube channel. So you can find that on our website. So if you are just joining us for part 2 and missed part 1, go to our website, click on the little YouTube icon in the upper left corner, and you can watch Al Boehm's part 1. Just a few quick reminders. As most of you were on the program, we don't need to go through all the introductory information about Zoom. Just a couple of quick things. Please remain muted throughout the program until it's time for questions later on. When it is time to talk, you can unmute yourself. And then please remember to mute yourself again afterwards, just to cut out any background noise that may be going on. Al will be using the screen share mode again this time. And so you may find the speaker view as your best option for viewing the program as clearly as possible. Al will pause periodically to open it up for your questions and comments, and also at the end, of course. So please just raise your hand and let us know you have a question, or type it into the chat box. And finally, we are recording the program. So if you'd prefer not to appear on the video, you can just stop your video feed and it'll just show up as a little black box with your name in it. But we love seeing your faces, and it makes it a little more fun and interactive to see you. So we hope that you'll continue to join us. So just a little introduction about Al. We're pleased to welcome Al back. He is a longtime member and supporter of Windsor Historical Society and well known for his illustrations on the front cover of the Exchange Club's local phone book. Al joins us this evening for his 4th presentation to Windsor Historical Society. So I'd like to, without any further ado, introduce Al Boehm with part 2 of our program. Take it away, Al.
Okay, bring up our slides.
Yeah. Boom.
Okay.
There we are.
Okay, hello and welcome back. We are going to have Chapter 2. Real quick, give me the next slide. We will just briefly review that this all started when the 375th booklet came out, and it showed these towns on the left. Click one more. Like, how did these become daughter towns of Windsor? And of course, last week we saw that, the next slide, please. And this is a resources reviewed last week, same for this week. In fact, it's probably these apply more, the Litchfield County and daughters of towns, than the previous week and last week. Okay, next slide. So we had, at the end of our story, Charles had died, his brother has taken over, and he created a dominion of New England and incorporated everything from New Jersey to Maine. So next slide. So it's, if you're interested in how that happened, but that's what created all the colonies turning in their charters. And we were the real obstinate one, but that was last week. So let's move ahead. And of course, to protect, one of the things they found out was the king wanted, you've heard of people had a land that was a king's grant. Well, the king wanted to get all undeeded land so he could grant it. Usually it was because he owed people money. In fact, at this time, Pennsylvania didn't exist, but he owed a lot of money to William Penn because he sure gave him a pretty big colony. So next. And so when we left, the general court had basically deeded the whole northwest corner of the colony to Hartford and Windsor. And as we saw, any other undeeded went to most of the other existing colonies, got a little piece of new land. But we've got what was 30 or 300,000 acres. We got a lot of land. So next. And so as we left last time, it said this land just kind of laid around for 30 years. So now we're going to jump ahead 30 years, and we're not going to talk about any kings or queens. They are out of the picture as of now. So the western land is sitting there. It was known as Indian Territory. Next slide. So something's coming, so we say. And so this is the population. I forget what source I got this curve from, but it basically from 1640, when we started Windsor or Connecticut colonies, through 1700, there was a slower growth of people. And all of a sudden, there's a very steep incline as people are settling in and having larger families. And by 1718, the population of Connecticut had doubled in the last 15 years. So next. So people are starting to look west. And as the court, the first headline at the top just kind of requotes the granting to Windsor and Hartford these lands to make a plantation or village thereon. So at least one Hartford and one Windsor speculator, and combined with somebody from Lebanon, I think it was. But anyway, they went out and with the Indians negotiated for a piece of land called Bantam, and that sat right above the existing colonies. And so they laid out 60 sites, 25 acres each, and they held 3 lots for ministers and smaller town lots for schools and meeting houses, all the thing you had to do to create a brand new town. It caught the general court off guard, and they reluctantly incorporated the uninhabited town, which was really strange for them, but they didn't like the name, so they called it Litchfield. So we'll do a little magic next here. And Bantam became Litchfield, but this is right near where Bantam Lake is, obviously, today. So next slide. So the general court then said, we really gave them all that land, but it was just to hide it from the king. But Windsor and Hartford thought that, no, you deeded it to us, it's ours. So the general court then passed a law forbidding anyone to enter or start a housing, to build a house in the land other than Litchfield. And if they found anyone there, they were going to pay a 50-pound fine. Now, at that time, 50 pounds was about the wage for your minister in town, which is usually the only college-educated person in town. So 50 pounds was a significant penalty. So it would take 6 years to reach a compromise. And so next slide. And so the compromise is that Hartford and Windsor would keep the blue section to the right, and the western half would go back to the colony. And so with that, Now the next question is, what are we going to do with this blue section between two towns? And so next slide, we'll see that this is a very standard thing when two towns had some disagreement within the colony early on. They would have a committee, a subcommittee of the general court or the General Assembly, and Windsor would nominate 3 people, Hartford would nominate 3, and the general court would find 3 neutral people to negotiate the compromise, whatever it's going to look like. So this was pretty traditional, and you can see, you know, the Windsor names of Allen and Wolcott. There's Talcott's and Ensigns from the committee. And of course, the general court has Wadsworth and Brainerd, 2 very Connecticut names. So next. So it took them 3 years, but they came up and made a decision to break it into 7 towns. And they hopskitched around. The gold mustard colored towns are going to Hartford, the blue towns to Windsor. So this is how we inherited Colebrook, Barcampstead, Torrington, and the west half of Harwington. Hartford got the east half of Harwington, and they came up with the name of Hartford Windsor Town, and it's Harwington, and they're proud to say it's the only one in the world. So, and then researching, just okay, now that the question is, these towns exist with name. It used to be the name of the town was the last thing the general court would issue, but here, these come pre-named and nobody's there. So next. So 1720 became a key year in the distribution of the land, kind of because that's when the stumbling block of and the negotiations started on what's really going to happen to this land now that people want to move westward. And so 1720 was the Litchfield. It was the push for further development by Hartford and Windsor. That's when the general court stopped anything. So anyway, it's a key year which will establish who gets what. Next. So like I say, the easy part's over. The colony is concerned, it's now all up to Hartford and Windsor. But the land must be distributed among the proprietors, as they were referred to. And this is just who are the taxpayers, who pay taxes in the year 1720. So the first, you're going to distribute people to a town, and then each town will form its own committee on how it's going to distribute the land itself. Of course, if there was any affected tribes, then you had to negotiate the land from them first. You had to figure out where roads were going to be. You got to figure out how you're going to clear roads. So anyway, we're going to repeat this in a later slide. So just note, this will take 60 years to complete this whole complete process. Next. So in 1720, Windsor was large, spread out, what I call 7 towns, but it's really 8 towns, where it says Quantick, that's not really a town, but Windsor Locks is. But anyway, so I went out to just figure just how many people, did everybody get a piece of each town, or were you going to be given just one town? And to check it, I went to town hall and talked to the clerk, and she brought out the tax records from 1720. So next page. So here on the left is a chit, I call it a chit. It's about a 3-inch by 4 to 5-inch sheet that is handwritten, and there's just pages and pages of these. In fact, there are 365 names in the records for that year. And I happened to take a picture of Jacob Strong. And if you look and see how he's taxed, because his tax rate is going to tell how many acres he gets. So it starts with, he has 2 poles, the PLOS or ES, I think, and it looks like it's, they taxed the people, men 15 to 60 generally, who can work the land. And then you paid for your meadow land, was more expensive than bogs, which were pretty cheap. I believe the next one is an acre of house land, because initially that would have been built inside the palisade, where on Windsor, the meadow land would have been out on the Great Plain and well, anyway, on the coastal plain of the river. Then the 10 acres of upland usually where you got your trees and your firewood. And then you got paid for this 1 axe, 3 cows, 3 horses, 3 of 2-year-olds, and then it almost looks like there's 3 of 1-year-old, and 1 swine. And for that, Jacob Strong is 79 pounds and 15 shillings. The 2 numbers on the right under the S, looks like a 5, but it's really an S for shillings, is 3/4 of a pound. So it's almost 80 pounds for him. So next. And when you looked at it, at this point, there were 144 taxpayers, or usually families, on the east side of the river. None of them were large enough to really break away from Windsor. That won't happen for another 25 years. So then there's this was in 3 groups. The next one is, I think, and this was listed as east of the big river. And the next slide, and we'll see north of the little river had less people, but almost 90. And most of the people in Windsor were below the little river of 130. No, that's even, so together the west side had a little more than the east side. And so this is how Windsor was kind of divided in 1630 or 1730, excuse me. Next slide. So this is a photo in England of a lottery of 1750 or 1730, but everybody gets together. They said that it looked like they have big drums for this lottery, but anytime you had a big capital project, each town would raise a lottery to pay for it. So somebody was going to make some money and the town would get the rest. So this time, the lottery is assigning a property to each proprietor or taxpayer. So the next slide, I tried to look at, this is the acres of each of these towns that Windsor is going to distribute. They're generally 20,000 acres and Harwington just under 10,000. But the number that somebody had to look at and decide, whoa, Torrington can support a lot more buildable acres than Colebrook and Harwington at the time. Barcampstead was kind of the middle, and somehow they had to figure, and I'm not sure, just how many proprietors were assigned to each town, because the lottery box that you were going to pick from specifically gave the number before the lottery started. So, you know, you can look on the right, 108 for Barcampstead, almost 80 for Colebrook, 40 for Harwington, and 136 for Torrington, quite a bit more. So next. So after that, then 7 committees are formed, 1 for each town, including the Hartford towns. And each committee has to put together a plan and go to the general court to get approval before they distribute any land. And so somebody has to go out and survey the land and the location of roads. They got to allocate land for public uses, schools, cemeteries, meeting houses, parsonages. And the committees decide that, you know, this is 20,000 acres is 30 square miles. It's generally a 5-mile by 6-mile township. And so they decide they can't chew that apple in one bite. They're going to break it into 3 to 5 sections. And then they survey and distribute the parcels 1 section at a time. So if you're a taxpayer, you're going to end up between 3 and 5 non-contiguous parcels, unless you then barter with your neighbors to exchange things. And this process will take 60 years. It's not a overnight all the extra people in Windsor moved west to these towns. Let us go next. Okay, so it's kind of an interesting pattern, but it shouldn't be surprising. Here's Litchfield, which is a town, and we'll go one at a time. Next, first town, it took Harwington 4 years to become a town. New Hartford next, 5 years. It took Torrington 7 years, so it's pretty good. It's moving, but it's moving from where it's populated to the east and the south, kind of northwestward. The surprise kind of is now the 4 northern towns are a little more rugged, but the first is going to be Heartland in 28 years, then in Winchester, which is the next one, and that took 38 years before it became a town, and then finally Colebrook and Barcampstead, 46 years. And 46 years puts them right in the middle of the Revolutionary War, where the county, the Connecticut government would like to collect taxes. They're not paying taxes until they're a town. So when you have a war on, it doesn't mean they were ready to become a town, but they became a town. Next. So how do we know what happened in these towns? Well, in the one of the books for Torrington had a list of all the people and their taxes of that year, which would determine how much land they got. So I looked here, and Jacob Strong, luckily the one thing that I just picked at random from 360 names, he's going to Torrington. And there's his 79 and 15 shillings of land that he's going to get for the first pull. Next. And we're going to follow him along. Here you can see this one I just highlighted. The first distribution is going to be 1 acre per pound of tax. So it's going to be easy. And there's about 47 acres, the average of all this, the taxes here. But we're going to look at the next, and it's Jacob up top. He only gets 3 acres, whereas Matthew Grant, the next guy, he gets 180. So one of the things you will notice is, the next one is, just like today, the rich get richer. So next. So once you have your land, what are you going to do with it? The taxpayers, remember, they're now pulling, but it was 14 years ago that their assessment was made, and they're surely settled in Windsor and are not ready to go anywhere. So, so they were established in Windsor, and so what could they do? Well, their oldest son inherits the family farm. Second son is on his own, and so on. So this is an opportunity to give or sell. A lot of times you had to pay $1 just for them to process a deed. So officially you sold it to your son for $1. Daughters could attract husbands looking for property. And in the case, I think, of New Hartford, one of the first people was somebody downstate who married the daughter of a landowner now, and he gave them the land. That was a gift to the daughter. And the next was, you could sell them to strangers and speculators. The population was exploding. This was, you didn't want to use the land, you tried to sell it. And Windsor names you will see in these new towns are classic Windsor names, the Phelps, the Ellsworth. In fact, for Torrington, 10 Ellsworths got property. That was the largest single family name that I saw in their list. And so we'll go on next. So now you're going to start to lay out the town, and we're going to show you how this worked for Barcampstead. You had to draw up a map of the whole outline. And back then they didn't use feet, they used rods and chains. And so there's a photo of the chain. It would stretch out to 66 feet. 10 chains equals a furlong. Only horse racing in America uses furlongs, but they still do. 8 furlongs was a mile. Anyway, what's going to be important of all these numbers to the left is the bottom. 1 rod, which equals your taxes, times 1/2 mile is an acre. So for every pound of taxes you paid, the map is going to be set up in essentially rods by a 1/2 mile. So, and you can see when they are done with this, the chain and the compass, and these are both of the chains and the compass. The chains might be in our historical society, because the one in Torrington, I can't remember where I got it, but one of them, the Torrington was all over the wall. You could really kind of see it around the room, the chain they had. But then the compass is not small. This compass is like 10 inches in diameter. Would go out to check the orientation of your boundary lines. And so next slide. So what you do is Barcampstead went out and laid out roads a 1/2 mile wide. They tried to make them parallel, but you can see in the middle through the geography in that area that they really had to bend and move things around. But generally you want to make 1/2 mile wide strips. And then you go and the first person picks the first lottery, and you draw that many from your rod scale, you draw that across the map. So we'll go to the next one and you'll see how this is going to work. So this is the final map of showing all the land distributed. And if you could click the next, you'll see the first pull. And the first pull is right up the middle, and the border that is with, at the time it was Simsbury, but today it's Canton and Granby is the right side. But they start at the left, and they're just going to work up the chart and come down to the bottom and work up the chart. And so show the next slide, and you'll see a close-up of the middle. Here's the column 1/2 mile wide on the left, and whatever the taxes are, the person just puts the rod scale down and draws a line across. So here you see, here's the first pull of 8, the first pull of 9. The P's are the public land that this is kind of right in the middle of the town, and this is set aside for the church, the schools, the cemetery. And then it goes 10, 11, 12 up, and you can see it came up to the top at 44, and it comes down to the next row at 45 and works up. Right below that area, you will see the Roman numeral 4. That was the 4th pull. And so they just kept moving up the chart with each lottery ticket pulled. Okay, so next. And we talked about the public. Here you can see the 51, 52, the second arrow points to some small lots, taxpayers, whereas the bottom arrow points to somebody who gets a lot of land. You know, that's easily, 80 to 100 acres. Okay. Now let's look at topography. Here's a topography map of Barcampstead today. And remember, where the reservoir was the east branch of the Farmington River. It was, and the hole, and it really filled up what was known as Barcampstead Hollow. So where you see light green, that's nice, maybe arable land, except the top of the middle, light green, is the top of some pretty good sized hills. The very dark lines means these topography lines are, when you see a dark brown line, it means it's a sheer cliff, very steep. The right side of the Barcampstead you see is a very steep. In fact, when you drive there, you really drop down to get to the dam. Of course, the dam wasn't there then. Next slide. Here is the first pull superimposed on that land. So if you've got the east side, the right-hand side, That's not good looking land. Where the bottom comes up and bends to the right, wow, that's nice and flat right in there, but it's a tough topography. Next slide just puts a line that became the main road through town. That's where the development was in the hollow initially, before they filled in the Barcampstead reservoir. Okay, next. So I copied this little settlement from the Daughters of the Town book, but I've highlighted this. Don't try to read as written. I just highlighted the important things. So in 1759, this is now 25 years after the first pull. There's only 20 families living in Barcampstead and only one from Windsor. And it was the first pull of Palladia Allen. And it defines the township as being rough, stony, and mountainous. 2 granite ridges running north and south. Soil not good for farming, and few meadows along its rivers. And when you really think about the last one, the Connecticut River Valley, when Adrian Black was the first European to discover it, it had been estimated that 200,000 Native Americans summered over, grew corn and squash and beans, pole beans. And that's where they summer encampments. They would go uplands for the winter, and because it usually flooded the next spring, and down they would come for the summer and plant and live along the river valley. And you look at the Connecticut River Valley, it had great meadows. We had the Great Meadow, we have the Madianic Meadow. Towns had names like Weathersfield, Enfield, Suffield, Hatfield, Deerfield, Greenfield. So the Farmington River through Barcampstead with few meadows really affects your ability to grow crops. So the next page is another section, because in 20 years, the General Assembly made them a township, as I mentioned earlier. And so the next year, Barcampstead petitioned the colony for tax relief. Remember, the main reason for making them a town was to collect some taxes for the war. But this is the quotes in the write-up. Inhabitants very pure and low, which I assume means social status. Many have neither land nor stock. By reason of poverty, there's no minister, meeting house, or schoolhouse, and not enough, quote, grain raised for the use of the inhabitants. So they were having a hard time feeding themselves with the natural ability of the land to produce food. 16 years later, though, things seem to have recovered, because they're now paying colonial taxes and sending their first representatives to the General Assembly. In fact, you couldn't send representatives until you paid your taxes back in the day. And when I visited the Barcampstead Historical Society, they said that the one shelf-stable crop they came up with that they could harvest was cheese. They could raise cattle, I don't know, maybe goats also, but cheese was something that they could produce and could market to other more prosperous areas, you know, down in the Connecticut Valley. So maybe cheese was a thing, but they all of a sudden were doing much better than they had 16 years prior. So next. So when you look at that, it took like 25 years for them to even have the second distribution. And real quick, it was just thought to be lumbering land. You look at the orange, there's 5 or 10 different homeowners that have access to that land for whatever it's worth, because they're going to now get the third pull. But the next slide will show that the whole left side was the third pull, and now they, you know, our friend Jacob, who had, he's not in this one. So now you have new land that you can sell or try to do something with. And at the same time, they pulled number 4. So they pulled 3 of them at one time. And so you can see they filled in the middle, but the right side, which you would think might have some decent land, was held off for last. And that wouldn't happen for another 17 years or 27 years before they had the last pull. So this was very slow in developing. Colebrook didn't even have their first pull until 1760. So at the time they were doing 3, 4, 2, 3, and 4. Colebrook did its first. Next. So one of the things I did was look at the layout of roads. Do the next slide. Just want you to see how many roads, and this was from earlier, just how many roads were planned to fully develop the town of Barcampstead. And just look at it's pretty full. So next slide is 140 years later. And on this, we found all the roads that were on the original map. So next slide. So these roads, and now give me the next one. These are the roads were on the original chart. So you can see how few were actually ever constructed. The topography of the town really dictated the roads that went in after the first these assessments. I don't know how they bundled all the land back and forth, but they did. It was interesting is that Narragansett's being pushed out of Rhode Island bought 10% of the land of Barcampstead in the northwest corner. They bought 2,000 acres of land, and lived there for quite a while in the northwest corner, upper left. Okay, next. So when you look at what's Barcampstead today, Windsor has about 28,000 residents. They're a little under 4,000. But look what they do have because of the topography. They've got Enders State Forest. They've got Tunxus State Forest above it. People's State Forest is on the left side of the reservoir. American Legion Forest is right below that. Barcampstead itself has more land than the forests do. And Ratland Mounty, where Ski Sundown is, was never developed. It was never on the map to be distributed. So, so this is, as you can see, a very forested town here. Okay, next. And so, any questions about Barcampstead here?
Yeah, Al, we've got a couple of questions. One just came up in the chat box, which I'll read to you. From Julian Hershey was Barcampstead a tax dodge for Windsor residents who owned land there during the Revolution? The owners of plots there claimed poverty, though they actually lived in Windsor. That's a question.
And I wouldn't know. They didn't have a list of who owned the properties. So it's really hard to make that judgment. Can't answer that, but it's a good question. And there's a real interesting question that I didn't pursue, which is really similar to that, is when this land is vacant, did the Windsor landowners of that land have to pay taxes? And the answer is probably no, because there was no town, but after it was a township, the state might have had the ability to tax them, but don't really know the answer.
Good. Any other questions, folks? Please feel free to wave your hand frantically and I'll be glad to call on you, or just unmute yourself. Oh, okay, Al.
So we're going to talk about Torrington, which had a completely different development path. because it had so many people, the biggest number of people drawing, it only had 3 divisions, and pretty much 3 divisions and the public land needs filled up the whole town. It developed fairly quickly. It was incorporated in, just 7 years. So let's see, it's going to be a different path of what we're going to look at in Torrington than we did in Barcampstead. So this is a map. They had a map like the other one with no names, but somebody had created a map that listed who actually was chosen for every one of these parcels. And, but it's followed the same process as all the other 6 towns, but it just had a shorter time cycle between lotteries. So next slide. I've switched this map so it's straight up and down. But the first one is going to be the orange color. So next. So again, they held off the middle. They did the west side and the east side. But here, the south side is Litchfield, which is starting to develop. And they have on their right, they have New Hartford. And so this is the first poll. And 4 years later, we have the second poll. And then just a couple of years after that, in 1742, we have the last poll. And that's next. And you'll see the red will fill in the third poll, which filled the middle. What's interesting is the big blank space in the middle was for the public use, but we'll find out later that the river confluence between how Barcampstead had the east branch and the west branch of the Farmington rivers. Torrington has the east and west branch of the Naugatuck rivers, and they are confluences at the bottom of the page. The blank at the bottom is the fact that there was a swamp down there, a bog. So they did not disperse that land. They thought that was not developable. So next. Remember our man, Jacob Strong. I chose to follow Jacob. I found, since he's in Torrington, where in Torrington? So let's look at the next slide. And we'll see, I found his 3 plots. And we know that he was 61 years old and he remained in Windsor. But he gets 3 plots of almost 80 acres. And so looking at this, and you look close up, the next slide, the yellow parcel in the upper right, the lower left of the circle, you can see Jacob Strong, pool number 122. He sold it to a man named Burr. And if you look to the right by Thomas Filer, and what's really funny is the Filers and Strongs lived side by side in the Palisades before moving west here. Anyway, 2 up, Burr also bought John Cook's property. And so, wondering that Jacob Strong, must have sold it to Burr. So next slide. And you'll see, next, click next, you'll find out that this northwest corner is known as Burrville. And there's a Burr Pond and a Burr Pond State Park up in this neighborhood. So the Burrs definitely took over this part. So now let's look down. Well, how about the orange one? So next slide. And we're going to see this one has the name Thrall. The next, look next here. And you can see John Strong. It's Jacob Strong. There was no John Strong. Anyway, Thralls bought it. Now we know in Windsor, we know the Thralls. Next slide, because this is one of my phone book covers. And they're a big farming family in Windsor and still are probably one of the biggest landowners in Windsor. But they also were a growing family and went to Torrington, part of the family. So next we'll go back to our map. And so I'm looking, is this red one a good location for Jacob Jr.? And so I decided to take another map that I got from the Torrington's Historical Society. which showed the topography in 1750. And so let's superimpose it. I superimposed it on top of this map. So next, and here it is, and it looks actually pretty good. In fact, it's kind of funny because the two rivers are the blue lines to the left of the Naugatuck. The blue line, this is the headwaters of one branch of the Farmington River. This is actually higher than the north, and the water is flowing down to the north. But it looked like it might be decent. You know, one side had a hill. As I look at this map, though, they have some, you know, this is now 1770, and they have some names on the map down on the lower. So give me next. And I look at this and go, whoa, there's a Strong Fowler house. And sure enough, Jacob Strong's house is marked because it's the oldest dwelling believed to be still standing in the town of Torrington. And so we'll look next, and we find that, you know, did it's his land, or, well, his cousin, Samuel Strong, has a property. He either, you know, bought it from Samuel, or he decided to live near his cousin. I didn't check that any more detailed, but that's right in the area where Samuel Strong has property. It was an interesting lead that I never followed up on. So here we go. Next. But his house is marked. Yeah, let's move on. So Jacob Strong is well known because it was because he moved to Torrington in 1739. And his first home was a log cabin. When they incorporated, the town incorporated Torrington in 1740, there were only 8 families living in town. And Jacob Jr. is written down because he wrote the town minutes for the first town meeting. He was the first town clerk. And we know he built his permanent home in 1750 on the same parcel. So, or we assume it's the same parcel. So next. So that's what we know about Jacob Jr. anyway, which I thought was interesting to follow that lead. And at the time I was following, you know, because the Windsor Historical Society thought they, you know, for 75 years were living in a Fowler house. So Fowler was interesting to find that these two little silhouettes here are from the Torrington Historical Society. The first room when you go into the display building is a room called Windsor. And it features Stephen and Polly, who moved to Torrington, sold their farm in Windsor, and moved in 1781. So they moved in, you know, 30, 40 years after the other people. But they're featured there for some interesting reasons. So next, this family became very successful. This is their house. They built in the middle of the town, up north from the others. They were enterprising. They actually ran a dairy farm, a sawmill, because they were near the river, a brickyard, a cider mill, a brandy mill, and a wooden dish mill. Made a lot of dishes from the trees around, turning them on early lathes, I'm sure, and water driven. And with that, look at your next slide. Their grandson continued on his enterprising ways, because this is the house he had built, and started in 1876. Now we're now, you know, 1900, moving into the 20th century. And he's a grandson of Stephen named Orzimus. And he had a daughter. He hired the Hotchkiss family, brothers, who were starting in construction, to build this house. And their daughter, Gertrude Fowler Hotchkiss, married one of the Hotchkiss guys. He bequeathed the building on her death to the Torrington Historical Society. So this is a living museum. It's been closed for COVID. They're hoping to open it this this season. But you can go to their website and take a virtual tour through this house through their website. It's a lot like Mark Twain's house. And Gertrude was a seventh generation American, I call her filer and strong. All the filers in Connecticut and were all descendant from a Walter Filer and from the Enterprise, I think was her name, or something like that. But the mother was a Strong. So all the filers are related to Strongs in the Connecticut history. Next, I think we're at our end. Oh, it is good. Any questions about Torrington? We're right at the end here, and hearing them, we talked about this of Western migration, and we've all heard about Western migration. And it's interesting that the migration westward and northward kind of followed wars. Wars changed everything. So we're going to start with when the French and Indian War was over, the 7 Years' War, we gained all the way to the Mississippi River from France. But the king, King George at the time, right along very close to today's Appalachian Trail, he called it a line of demarcation, the demarcation line. Everything to the west is to be undisturbed. It's Indian reserve. The colonists were looking to go past that line, and it's on a list of contributing factors to the revolution, the desire to go past the proclamation line. On the other side of the Alleghenies and Appalachians and Alleghenies. Okay, next. So what did open was southern Vermont. That was part of the domain or dominion of New England. So in 1761, 1 year after they were pulling for the second time in Colebrook and Barcampstead, southern Vermont opened up, which was more attractive. 1761, Vermont was established as the first town, and 22 towns in southern Vermont have same name as Connecticut towns. So this now put a real competition of and looked more attractive than Barcampstead and Colebrook. So the first move westward was really northward. And then next we had the Revolutionary War, which as soon as that was over, there is no demarcation line. And that's when Western New York, Western Pennsylvania, and Ohio opened up for moving west. Next, just real quick, we're going to go, don't read the words on the left, but Connecticut's charter, of course, went from Narragansett Bay to the Pacific Ocean. But when the west or the Ohio area opened up, Connecticut said, we just want the Ohio section. We don't want the Illinois, Indiana westward. But they divided it in half, our swath. And the firelands were the green area to the left. And that was set aside for Connecticut people who lost their land in the Revolutionary War. I'm not sure how they lost it, but that's how it's listed. So that was given to volunteers. So the Western Reserve, as Connecticut knows it, and as it's called in Ohio, was land that was strictly speculative. The Connecticut state now was paid. They established, they essentially gave it to two stockbrokers or land brokers, real estate agents, to try to sell, but they couldn't keep up with their annual sales. So they put it out to bid and sold it to a Connecticut land company in 1795 that was located in Philadelphia. But all the proceeds went to Connecticut except for their sales commission. And this company is the one who sent their surveyor, General Moses Cleveland, out to survey, divide up the towns, and in the Western Reserve, the red section. And so that was good income for the state of Connecticut while it lasted. But there's still a lot of good Connecticut names, Windsor names in that area, if you read the Stiles book and history on the expansion west. And so that talks about Western, you know, the move westward when the population of Windsor and Connecticut just started getting larger and larger. So that's, I think, my conclusion. Let me see what's next. Oh, there was a question about it. Are these real or really daughter towns? It's kind of, they fit a strange thing because, you know, towns like East Windsor, South Windsor, Ellington, East Granby, they all started within a town of Windsor. They paid all their town taxes to Windsor. These Western towns were funny in that they were established as a town before anybody was in them. But I used to kind of consider them stepdaughters, but I don't even think that's an appropriate term. But anyway, it was something that made available a way of handling overpopulation and or just making some money. And the real Western expansion actually just went beyond Connecticut's borders, ultimately. So with that, I think I just have an acknowledgement slide to the historical societies of, you know, Doug and the Michelles, because Rain also helped along with Michelle Toms, and the Torrington Historical Society and the Barcampstead. They're worth visiting. They're just check when they're open, and they have good websites. So any questions?
Oh, we do have a couple of questions in the chat box.
Okay.
And I'll go ahead and read them. From Tom Kelsey, he says, your presentation says westward development had to do with more land distribution. I had the feeling that establishment of towns had more to do with local natural resources, mostly rivers and locations for mills. Who is correct?
Well, within each town, they obviously redirected things by the topography of where it was. Towns were definitely located, you know, if you look at Torrington, Torrington had such good river flow at the confluence of the east and west branches of the Northcote River that they became a city in the 1850 timeframe and the Industrial Revolution. But within the towns, if you look at Barcampstead, the towns up there, or the villages up there, were, yes, driven by where water was plentiful. You know, Riverton, Pleasant Valley, and the center of town all had factories because they had water power. So it's where within the, but the outline of those towns were all politically drawn on a map where they probably had no idea what the topography was under the map. But within the towns, yes, things grew. And Winchester, we think of it as Winstead because that's the small city that had the water power. Torrington City, you know, may be separate than Torrington Town for all I know. I know in, you know, we had, you know, Winstead is a city living in the town of Winchester. Rockville is a city living in the town of Vernon. And that's just where the natural resources said you're going to build a higher population as we were in the 19th century. What was interesting in Torrington was the confluence of the river. They gave the right to somebody to start a sawmill and gave them a 999-year lease. which isn't over until, another 400 years or 500 years. So, but yes, natural resources determine where people went, but not how they divided the land.
That's a good summary statement. One more question for you, Al, from Julian Hershey. First of all, fantastic research. Why did Connecticut make money from sales in Western lands, in the Western Reserve, excuse me?
Because it was deeded to us. Don't forget, nobody, and breaking up Ohio and establishing the states out there, it was after the Revolution. We weren't even allowed to go over the mountains there. So the colonists, knew nothing out there. They had no land other than each of the states still had a king's grant to certain parts of the land. And for Connecticut, it was called the Western Reserve. Unfortunately for Massachusetts, north of us, that went right through Lake Erie and they had only water. So, it's, and the first thing they had to do, of course, from the first presentation was the overlap in the King's grants created a real havoc for the original Articles of Confederation of where the land was, where the boundaries were. And that's what they worked on the first few years. I would just straighten it out, who owns what where. And for some reason, Connecticut claimed that section, their strip in Ohio, because one of the things was they agreed to abandon everything west of there. So at the time, it looked like a cheap exchange, I assume. But that's the only strip we had westward of the Connecticut boundary. So, is that,
Okay.
I hope that helps answer it. I don't,
Yeah.
I always say, go to Wikipedia, Connecticut Western Reserve. It probably has a whole section on it.
Now we've got another question from Nat. And the question is, how did the lottery work? Did the proprietor get a number that determined the order in which he could select which parcel he wanted?
I assumed that the kid had a name on it. It was, the lottery ticket just had a person's name and his taxes. So it would have said Jacob, Jacob Strong, 79 3/4 pounds. That's but I don't know beyond that.
Good. Well, thank you. And Julian appreciates your answer. Any other questions? Well, I appreciate the questions, and Al, I appreciate your answers too, to all of those and everything that you've shared with us tonight. The comment earlier about great research, it's hard to imagine how much time you spent learning about all of these things, and thank you for putting it together so nicely and sharing it with us. Folks, just wanted to thank you again this evening for joining us. Thanks to Sue for all of her work and staying late on these two occasions to keep us straight here on our Zoom program. Just a couple of quick things. Last week, I mentioned that we have a special genealogy program, Seek and Ye Shall Find, coming up in February. It's 3 different Saturday afternoons in February. It's a virtual program. This is African American and Caribbean genealogy. So if you know anybody that might be interested, please do share that with them. Also, we have another history program coming up. It's an in-person program to be held in cooperation with Windsor Senior Center. It'll be 1 p.m. Wednesday, March 23rd, and it will feature popular Windsor dentist and photographer Len Hellerman. And he will enlighten us about Windsor's Horace Hayden and the founding of the dental profession. So much like Al, we've been trying to feature some of our very intrepid members and supporters who have done a lot of interesting research or have interesting lived experience and want to share that. In the case of Len Hellerman, I think it's a little bit of both. And so please do join us on March 23rd for his program. Do look to our website for more information and registration information. And we'll be sending you a survey this probably tomorrow for the final portion of this session. Hope you'll take just a minute or two and give us your feedback. It helps us always improve our programming. Thanks again, Al, and everybody for joining us. Look forward to seeing you at future programs, and stay safe, stay warm during this upcoming snowstorm, and enjoy the day inside, I hope. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Bye-bye.